Welcome to Columbia Law School. My name is Michael Gerard. I'm on the faculty here teaching environmental law and energy law, and I founded and direct the Sabin Center for Climate Change Law, which is co-sponsoring this evening's event together with Columbia's Earth Institute, the Columbia Water Center, and EcoPeace Middle East. The Sabin Center develops legal techniques to fight climate change, trains the next generation of lawyers to use those techniques, and creates and posts legal resources that are used by judges, lawyers, academics, students, scholars, and activists around the world. We also put on many public events like this one. We have two more coming up that I wanted to tell you about. On October 17 at 7 p.m., we're having a discussion and debate on the question of whether storm barriers should be built to protect New York and New Jersey against flooding and sea level rise. On October 23 at 7 p.m., we're having an event on implementing New York State's important new climate change law. Further information about these events and getting on our free mailing lists about these and other events and legal resources are available on our website, www.columbiaclimatelaw.com. One of the aspects of the environment that will be most affected by climate change, of course, is water. In some parts of the world, we will have too much water. In some parts of the world, we will have much too little water. In some parts of the world, we will have liquid water where there used to be ice. Parts of the Middle East are among the places where we will have too little water, and that's expected to get progressively worse as the temperatures rise. This is adding to tensions in a region where there are already significant conflicts. EcoPeace Middle East works at the intersection of these multiple problems, the looming ecological crisis and its national security implications. It has offices in Jordan, Palestine, and Israel. Tonight we are privileged to hear from leaders of all three offices with their perspectives on addressing these intertwined problems. After our three speakers have spoken, we'll open up for the floor for questions. We'll end at 8:30 p.m. But first I would like to thank the Andrew Sabin Family Foundation, Louis Perlson Gross and Stuart Gross for generously funding the travel costs of our speakers and their colleagues. I also want to tell you all that this program is being videotaped and the tape will be posted on our website. Please silence your cell phones. So let me just tell you who our three speakers are. First, we'll hear from Gidon Bromberg, who co-founded EcoPeace Middle East in 1994 and has served as the Israeli director for the past 25 years. Mr. Bromberg, an attorney by profession, is an alumnus of Monash University in Australia, Washington College of Law at American University, and Yale University's World Fellows Program. He's written extensively on the relationship between water issues and Middle Eastern peace, and has presented before the UN Climate Summit, the UN Security Council, the US Congress, the European Parliament, and local and international forums. Nada Majdalani is the Palestinian director of EcoPeace Middle East. Formerly, she was a consultant, researcher, and practitioner in the field of environmental management. She had extensive experience in private sector development, leading technical positions in various projects in the areas of infrastructure development and institutional capacity building. Earlier this year, she presented before the UN Security Council, NATO, and local and international forums. Yana Abu Taleb is the Jordanian director of EcoPeace Middle East. She received a bachelor's in archaeology from the University of Jordan. As former deputy director and regional projects manager for EcoPeace Middle East, she has co-authored reports and policy papers and speaks regularly at local and international forums. So first I turn it over to Gidon Bromberg.
Thank you very much, Michael. We are tremendously grateful for the opportunity here to present at Columbia University, such a distinguished university and such an important law school, and such important work that the Sabin Center is doing, and we're grateful to both the Sabin and the Gross families for their support in bringing out not just the three co-directors, but three other staff from Israel, Palestine and Jordan that are here with us. There are two publications that are quite relevant to the presentation we're going to give today. One is indeed the title of this presentation. The other is a Water Energy Nexus, and they're all available as PDFs on our website that you can download otherwise. So EcoPeace is truly a unique organization. We're the only organization that exists in any field that is Palestinian, Jordanian and Israeli together. And that's a sad state of affairs, that we're the only one. And perhaps it's not a coincidence that it's the environment issue that has helped bring us together. Because as we well understand, the environment knows no borders. The organization works out of three offices in Ramallah in Palestine, in Amman in Jordan, and in Tel Aviv in Israel. And we focus on the transboundary environmental issues that we face. And we're very much focused on change. We reject the status quo. We want to see, and I put this out front, we want to see a two-state solution between Israel and Palestine, and we want to see an integrated governance and management across borders, Israel, Palestine, Jordan, and perhaps one day beyond. The focus of the presentation today, and the thesis we put before you really, is that climate change is a threat multiplier to the whole MENA region, Middle East, North Africa, that requires a shift in a paradigm shift in security thinking. That the narrow security focus, particularly military security focus, has prevented us from advancing, dealing with our shared water security issues. And now with climate change, it's even more pertinent to change the way that we look at our shared environment, and particularly our shared water resources. And perhaps finally, that all states in our region, and I think it's true globally, must realize that their own water security, as well as their neighbours' water security, must be part of their national security agenda. That if your neighbour fails, then you will you'll have an impact on the repercussions of that, and that will impact your security concerns as well. So water security, national security are two concepts that are not new. The UN, NATO, the EU have been discussing the relationship between water and security, particularly scarcity of water and national security concerns for a long time. Interestingly enough, the Trump administration for the United States launched a global water strategy and highlighted the concerns of water insecurity in the Middle East as a threat to American national security. The World Bank also recently. The MENA region is the most water scarce region in the world. So we're starting from a very, very difficult situation, and we are extremely conflict prone. There's no direct correlation, of course, between water scarcity and conflict, but it does lead to animosity, and it does feed many of the conflicts that are raging in our region. And then comes climate change, where the MENA region is a climate hotspot, according to the IPCC. What does that mean? It means that while the rest of you are worried about a 2 degrees increase in temperatures, we're worried about a 4 degrees increase in temperatures. We're worried about our region no longer being livable because the heat will be so extreme that life as we know it will be extremely uncomfortable. We're already experiencing long periods of drought. So in the last 20 years, there's been 15 years of drought in our region. And some of the latest data speaks to, by the end of the century, summer summer months increasing by 49%. That means clearly a cut in winter, in autumn, and in spring, and simply a much longer summer period. When we look at the indirect linkages, then climate change leading to negative social and economic development very much depends on the capacity. And the higher capacity of governance will reduce the impact, but the lower capacity will very much lead to greater frustration, conflict, radicalization, both within inter and intra groups within our region. As I said, we're already water scarce, and we're already consuming far more water than we have. So back in 2015, Israel, Palestine, Jordan together were consuming close to 300 million cubic meters of water just for domestic needs beyond the current capacity. That means we were overdrawing either our surface or our groundwater. And by 2030, a decade from now, we're going to be doubling the amount of water that we consume that's not being renewed. And that, of course, threatens the very viability of our natural water resources. Our three governments have policies in place. On climate change: government of Jordan, government of Palestine, government of Israel. And the three of us will speak a little bit to that, and I will start with Israel. So this is a graph of the Sea of Galilee, of the Kinneret. And what it's showing is that there's 100 years of historical record. You look at the last 20 years, and you see these deep drops. These are drought periods. These are drought periods where the levels of the Sea of Galilee have dropped to levels unknown in 100 years of historical record. These are the 15 years of drought in the last 20 years. Israel, however, is a world leader on water issues and has developed a sense of tremendous self-confidence that Israel can withstand the impacts of climate. Israel is the world leader in treating and reusing its sewage. Close to 90%, half of the agriculture in the country is grown on treated wastewater today. Spain is next at about 26%, and then Jordan at close to 20%. And of course, desalination, desalinating Mediterranean seawater. Israel has 5 of the largest reverse osmosis desalination plants in the world, and 70% of the drinking water of the country is no longer fresh water. It's desalinated marine water. So there's a sense of confidence that Israel can withstand the impacts of climate change by adapting technologies. And even the Sea of Galilee, which reached the black line last summer. That means that the Sea of Galilee, which is a freshwater lake, was so low that it risked being converted to a saline lake. And in order to combat that, Israel is building a pipeline. That pipe you see there is a pipe that will bring desalinated water to the Sea of Galilee to prevent the Sea of Galilee becoming a saline lake, and to meet commitments of water supply for Jordan. And the very thesis that we bring before you here is that we have our head in the sand if we think that one country can get beyond the rest. That if all three countries don't move forward in water security and energy security, then none of our countries move forward. And my colleagues will speak further to that. Jana.
Thank you, Gidon. So Jordan is facing a real water scarcity. Jordan is considered the second poorest country in the world when it comes to its natural water resources, making it one of the lowest levels of per capita per person at around 80 liters per day. The country consumes more water than what is available at renewable resources. What have we done as a country with the limited water resources? In the country, we have around 12 underground water aquifers that we're over abstracting. We have much of our resources shared with other countries. So we signed treaties, water treaties with Israel, which allows us to take 55 million cubic meters for Jordan at a very low price that we're actually getting for the country. But we've also signed a water agreement with Syria, which is very difficult because the Syrians, right after Jordan signed a water agreement and a peace agreement with Israel, built many dams over the Yarmouk River, over 40 dams, which don't allow the Yarmouk waters to enter into the Jordanian waters, basically. We're also facing many internal management challenges in the country. So water for domestic and agricultural uses is highly subsidized in the country. There are many cultural issues that people believe in, that water is a human right for them, which causes a lot of theft from the networks. But also, there are problems with the networks and the losses within the networks at a rate of over 50%, basically, which goes waste. How are we trying as government to cope with all these water shortages and water challenges? So the government has moved forward as well. And as part of the Red Dead Canal project, that's a regional project between Israel, Jordan, and Palestine, in 2013 signed an agreement for a water swap deal to purchase additional 50 million cubic meters of water as an exchange with Israel, where Jordan would be able to desalinate water in the south, in Aqaba, sell Israel 50 million cubic meters, and in return purchase an additional 50 million cubic meters in the north of the country, which we needed more, at very low prices, making it the cheapest source of water for Jordan. But there are also that fear in Jordan that we are depending more on the resources we are purchasing from Israel. Water cooperation has been there even before the signing of the peace treaty with Israel. So if we look at the photos on our left-hand side, you could see that King Abdullah I and Ben Has Rothenberg, during the British Mandate, signed agreements to build the first ever hydropower station, the Palestinian electricity company that would provide electricity to the northern area, all using the mightiness of what used to be the mighty Jordan River. We can see that after the signing of the peace treaty as well between the two countries, there have been further agreements and water arrangements as part of the Red Dead Canal, but also the swap deal between the three countries, Jordan, Israel, and Palestine. The situation of the water scarcity is becoming even more scarce because of climate change issues. Rain patterns are different. We have extreme droughts and flash floods, rises in temperatures in the country, which is making the situation even worse. With the Syrian refugee influx that happened in 2011, Jordan, and especially Amman, has really been facing severe water shortages. So before the Syrian refugee influx, we used to get, as Jordanian citizens, water that we had to fill in our tankers twice a week. Now the situation is worse and we have to share the limited water resources. And now we receive water once a week that we have to fill in the tanks and to use for the rest of the week. Most of our water resources go to our agricultural sector. Around 65% of our available water resources go to the agriculture, which really doesn't contribute much to our GDP in the country. It contributes between 2 and 4%, basically. And if we take the Jordan Valley as a focus of our work as EcoPeace, then we're seeing, because of the natural scarcity, because of the climate change effects, that there are even more severe water shortages, particularly in the southern parts of the Jordan Valley. But this is also shows that there are problems and challenges we are facing in the agricultural sector because of the unsustainable uses of our irrigation techniques, and because of the unavailability of water. People that depended in the Jordan Valley on their livelihoods depended on the agricultural sector. People had to abandon their farms, leaving them with nothing to do, raising the level of unemployment to 50%, especially among youth in the valley, which creates radicalization, of course, and leaving the economic situation very bad. And with this, I'll turn over to Nada to talk about Palestine.
Welcome to the most depressing part of the presentation. So the water reality in Palestine is not much different from what is it in Jordan, but adding to it the much more complex situation with the political conflict and the realities in Palestine. The water security issues, or let's say the water situation in Palestine, is pretty much governed by what has been entitled and designed in the peace accord and the interim peace accord of Oslo in 1995. And 25 years ago, when this agreement was struck, it was supposed to be a 5 years interim agreement, of which afterwards a final status agreement would be reached. And unfortunately, one of the core 5 issues, along with the refugees, Jerusalem, borders of the state of Palestine, and all these issues, it was water that was put one of the 5 final status issues to be negotiated on. Unfortunately, 25 years later, real peace did not materialize. And we are still stuck with the amounts that have been assigned for the Palestinians to withdraw from the shared water aquifers, which is approximately 200 million cubic meters per year, and which in reality Palestinians do not tap from the groundwater they only tap approximately 120 million cubic meters per year. And why is that? It's because the water management issues in Palestine is pretty much governed also by the Joint Water Committee that was developed and created with the Oslo Accords. The Joint Water Committee was designed in order to strike a cooperative relationship between Palestinians and Israelis to manage the shared water resources, which are basically the coastal, the mountain aquifer and the eastern aquifer, which is in the West Bank side for the Palestinian, but mostly the mountain aquifer, which is shared between Palestinians and Israelis. But unfortunately, Israel takes the lion's share. When 80% of the mountain aquifer is located in the West Bank, the lion's share is subtracted by Israel, and therefore to subsidize or to compensate for the shortage of water for the Palestinian communities, the Palestinian Authority purchases water from the Israeli water company. So therefore, as I mentioned, 25 years later, we're stuck with the same amounts, and certainly also the water rights for the Palestinians have not yet been determined. And also the water rights to access and to benefit from the Jordan River have not also been put on the table since the peace talks back in 1995. And therefore, also, the Jordan River remains also a part of the discussions of the sovereignty and the borders of the 1967 borders of the future Palestinian state. What does this leave us with? It leaves us with intermittent water supply and shortage for the Palestinian communities. The average supply for Palestinians in the West Bank reaches no more than 60 liters per capita per day. In communities in the south of the West Bank, it reaches up to 23 liters per capita per day, which means some communities do not get water through the network for over 3 months. You open the tap and there's basically no water. What happens and how do people cope? They cope with buying water through private tankers, and they are usually sold with very high prices through a black market. And a 10-liter tank could reach up to $100 price. Yes, 400 shekels for a 10 cubic meters tank. The situation in Gaza Strip is even much more depressing. These are the data that is produced by the Palestinian Water Authority for Gaza Strip. The Gaza water source is supposed to be the coastal aquifer, which its threshold or yield should not exceed more than 50 million cubic meters per year. Unfortunately, because of the high demand for the 2 million people that are living in Gaza today, there's overpumping from this aquifer, and therefore there's seawater intrusion, and therefore leading to much higher salinity in the aquifer, and high levels of chlorine, which makes approximately 93% of the wells and domestic wells in Gaza unsuitable for drinking and human consumption. Same thing is for the nitrate levels. What does this lead? It's a human catastrophe, a humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza Strip. A UNDP report mentions that by 2020, Gaza will be unlivable, and that 97% of the groundwater resources will not be suitable for human consumption. And 2020 has already reached, and we are already there. The situation also with wastewater, and due to the blockade on Gaza for the past 12 to 15 years, and the lack of electricity supply and construction material, and also the division and political division between the West Bank and Gaza has not allowed the Palestinians to construct and operate wastewater treatment plants, which causes about 34 Olympic swimming pools of raw sewage to be spilled into the Mediterranean Sea. The reality is sewage does not stop at the borders and does not stop at the shores of Gaza. They travel north with the currents and they cause the closure of desalination plants in Ashkelon in Israel, and the pollution of beaches, not only of Gaza, but also the beaches of Israel. And therefore, we have, as an organization, come with a mechanism of advocacy, which I'm going to speak about in a few. We've mobilized the public opinion of the Israeli communities around Gaza, and we've said that, and we've encouraged them to sign a petition to the government to say that the policies towards Gaza could protect for military issues and security issues, but cannot protect the Israeli civilians from pandemic diseases due to the policies that would not allow the treatment of sewage. So with climate change, the situation exacerbates, and for Palestinians, it's an additional burden to cope with climate change. And therefore, adaptation mechanisms with climate change are very difficult under such political situation, and of course under such lack of resources. What we're trying to do as an organization is to raise a lot of public awareness and across the board in the 3 countries on the climate change issues and water realities of our neighbors, water reality as well, and to show that the local dimension and national dimension also has a regional dimension. So we educate decision makers and the public, and we promote regional integration through policy making. This is a part of our programming. We engage a lot of youth through our bottom-up approach. We educate a lot of students and teachers. We also engage mayors. Sorry for the nudity picture, but it shows that they are real mayors of the Middle East. They have all, they're well fed. These are mayors of the Jordan Valley, and they've all jumped from Palestine and from Israel and from Jordan. They've all jumped in the clean stretch of the Jordan River to show that we all need to work together to protect this holy river that is holy for half of humanity. In terms of policy recommendations, we also have a lot of challenges, as you have seen, especially for Jordan and for Palestine, in terms of management of the water sector, in terms of reducing non-revenue water, the tariff systems, and so forth, and as well as of the infrastructure. But also we need to look at creating a roadmap for a regional integration for climate change. What EcoPeace is aspiring is to also create a position like a UN climate envoy for the climate change envoy for the Middle East, just as we have someone for peace. And this is very much linked to also the security in the region. And finally, is to strengthen regional relations through water and energy cooperation. And this is pretty much what EcoPeace has many good examples to learn from and to spread to the other areas of conflict in the region, which Yana will tell you more about.
So what are we doing in terms of adaptation measures? As an organization, we focus heavily on our shared water resources, and one of our main shared water resources is the lower part of the Jordan River. Over the years and since our establishment, we've done many studies looking at the state of the river, what the river used to look like before the unilateral decisions from our governments to trap and divert its water and heavily pollute it, to identifying the measures that need to be taken from different scenarios for from its full restoration to its partial rehabilitation, looking at the water reality in our region being a scarce natural region, basically. So in 2015, we hired an international firm, Royal Huskening DHV, but along with scientists and researchers from our region, created the first ever regional master plan that talks about sustainable development needs in the Jordan River Basin. The master plan identifies 7 strategic objectives, so it doesn't look at only water flowing back into the river due to its diversion from the responsible countries, Israel, Syria, and Jordan. It looks at sustainable agriculture, infrastructure, energy, all projects that are needed to achieve sustainable development and raise the level of economic prosperity for all the people in the 3 countries living on the banks of the Jordan River. It looks at shifting the current GDP of $4 billion into a $73 billion if we are to implement the 127 projects identified in the master plan. But another vision that we are really moving forward as an organization talks about the 2 most important resources in our region, being water and energy, and building on the European coal and steel agreement post-World War. So looking at the comparative advantages that we have in the 3 countries, in Jordan, Israel, and Palestine, and Gidon talked about Israel being world leader in desalinating water on the Mediterranean shores. Actually, Israel having excess water, around 650 million cubic meters, that they're able to sell to its neighbors, basically. And Palestine being able and having the right to also desalinate on the Mediterranean on its own, with a comparative advantage of Jordan having vast areas of desert that are with low ecological significance, that could produce solar energy and to meet 20% of its demands, 20% of Israel and Palestinian demands from renewable energy. So creating healthy interdependency of using the comparative advantages of the sea and the sun. Jordan to produce renewable energy from the sun in exchange for the water that they need. There are many benefits of a water energy exchange, especially when we're talking about geopolitical benefits of achieving water security on the national and regional levels, energy security, of course, for all 3 countries, diversifying our energy resources and not only depending on the conventional resources, promoting regional stability, which is much needed in our region because of the conflict, looking at integrating into the rest of the Arab world, improving international standards, and so on. What we are looking at after producing a pre-feasibility study, which you have copies that you can download from our website. We're currently looking into producing a pilot project on ground that would be proof of concept, where we would either build a solar farm on Jordanian land to cross into Israel to prove that renewable energy can cross the border, or a project that would be between Jordan and Palestine, also as a proof of concept for renewable energy, because at this time energy does cross from Jordan into Palestine through the Jericho grid. And with this, I end, and we open for questions.
Actually, Nada, can I just ask you to elaborate a little bit? You said that there's a projection that by 2020 Gaza will be unlivable. That's 3 months away.
Yes.
What are the scenarios that you see happening? Are there sort of emergency short-term actions that could be taken, or what do you see happening?
So at the moment there is long-term visions for Gaza. They're not emergency. There is some emergency projects taking place, like short-term low-volume desalination from the Mediterranean Sea. It is not enough because they are of small capacity. We're speaking about 10,000 cubic meters or 6,000, and there are 3 or 4 plants, which are also very difficult to operate under the current situation of energy supply, which is not more than 4 to 8 average hours per day. The situation is really collapsing. Pandemic disease could easily be spreading in Gaza. We could have another catastrophe like Yemen. International community is doing its best in order to basically put plans and to improve the water systems in Gaza. There's been also talks that through the Red Bed Canal Agreement, Palestine or Gaza will get another 10 million cubic meters from Israel. It will be purchased from the Israeli water company. Unfortunately, the current infrastructure as well in Gaza does not allow the receiving of this amount from Israel to improve the situation. In order to improve the infrastructure, you also need the funds and capacity building and so forth. Unfortunately, maybe Gaza is not on the top of the donors' agenda today. There's also lots of humanitarian crises around the world. There's the Syrian refugee crisis. There's Yemen, and there is all sorts of catastrophes around the world. It will not stop in Gaza. It will hurt our neighbors, and it will lead to pandemic diseases also in Israel.
About what's the population of Gaza?
2 million people.
I'm sorry?
2 million people.
2 million people.
And we're starting even to see that the floods of refugees is not also coming from Gaza, from Syria. It is very much likely that the refugees crisis will be coming also from Gaza at some point. And it was explicitly mentioned by our Palestinian Water Authority minister at one of the donors' meetings, and he closed his words that the European countries should really be preparing for boats of refugees from Gaza Strip.
Okay. Questions? In front of each of you is a microphone with a button, and if you push the button, people can hear you, and it'll also be recorded.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good, thank you. What kind of energy burden does desalinization take? And is there a point where it doesn't pay, where the shift is so heavy in terms of energy usage that the whole desalinization program has to be rethought?
So, is this on?
Have to press.
So, desalination is energy intensive, and that's one of the downfalls. As an environmental organisation, we think that desalination should always be the last resort. That you need to make sure that you have the conservation measures in place, pricing is appropriate, you're treating all your wastewater and reusing it, and when you have nothing else, and that is the situation for the Middle East, then you're going to need also to manufacture additional water. And desalination is an option, but we believe it should only be an option with solar energy as the energy source and not fossil. And that's why the water energy nexus that Jana presented is such an interesting model for climate adaptation and climate mitigation. That if we can have solar as the source of increased electricity per se, then we harness the sun and we reduce our CO2 emissions. And we use that for climate adaptation of increasing additional water supply. And that's a potential game changer. That increases the pie of water becoming available and ostensibly could help solve the Israeli-Palestinian water issue as well. In 1994-1995, when the water accords of Oslo were signed between Israel and Palestine, there was only natural water. And coming to a fair share was going to produce winners and losers. It would have meant that Israeli farmers would have lost a lot of their water, and hence water was put as a final status issue to be dealt with as a deal. Israel will be so-called generous on water, Palestine will be so-called generous on refugees, for example. That's no longer the reality today. There's no longer just fresh water, there's now massive amounts of manufactured water. And what at EcoPeace we're coming and saying is that continuing to hold water as a final status issue is actually holding water hostage. It is holding the livelihoods of Palestinians, but also Israelis to some extent on the issue of treated wastewater. And we could be moving forward on the water issue. And sadly, both of our governments are maintaining a policy on water that either we solve all of our final status issues, Jerusalem, refugees, and water, and so forth, or we don't solve anything. And a major call of ours, because of the ability to manufacture water today at very reasonable prices, we could put water aside and start to build some trust and to show that there is a partner to peace, that we can reach a final status agreement on one of our issues and move forward from that.
I feel like you just touched on this, but I'm curious what the governmental reactions have been to the master plan that was developed. How have they responded? Has there been any sort of movement on it? Any sort of talks or anything?
When we started the process, we intended to involve our governments, getting the data from the governments, involving them in the public hearings that we did as decision makers, again getting their feedback and approvals on the data that went into the master plan as a first step. But then looking or being realistic, 127 projects that should be implemented to achieve sustainable development on, especially in Jordan and Palestine, and a number of regional projects that need to happen in terms of management of the Jordan River from the three countries. So what we did, but also in consultation with our governments, is we identified a set of 11 priority projects that are acceptable to all the 3 countries, decision makers in 3 countries. And the aim is that we're working on currently is to have the 11 projects part of an MOU that our 3 governments would sign in order to take to the World Bank and create a trust fund that would enable the 3 countries to implement the projects on ground.
Yeah, you mentioned the public reaction to increased dependency on Israel for water supply as a pretty negative thing. I'm wondering why you think that is the case, and then also from the Israeli perspective, what's the public reception of increased cooperation with Jordan on water?
So, I mean, no country or politician or would like to see full dependence on another country, especially when it comes to their water resources, basically. But the reality is, especially for Jordan, that we are depending on Israel to purchase our additional needs of our water resources, basically. But that doesn't mean that the country will become fully dependent. The government of Jordan is looking at diversifying projects on its own, basically from treating, more treatment of wastewater and reuse of wastewater. What we're trying to do as an organization is we're saying, okay, we're, as a country, as Jordanians, we are dependent on Israel for our to purchase more of our needs of water, but let's also strike that balance of building interdependencies, and this is why we are really heavily advocating and working on a water energy nexus, because it will give Jordan an upper hand to be able to sell renewable energy to Israel, and that way we create interdependencies between the countries.
So the Israeli public is fearful of being dependent on another Arab country. We live in terrible animosity, there's terrible hate amongst our different countries, and there's a lot of vocal people in the public that would rather not see, I think on the Jordanian side, purchase water from Israel, or on the Israeli side from purchasing electricity from Jordan. But the dimension that we bring, and the dimension that's been very effective, is to highlight the broader human security implications of not moving forward on interdependency. That by not purchasing electricity from Jordan, then Jordan remains extremely reluctant to purchase more water from Israel. And that threatens Jordan's stability, and that threatens Israel's security. So at the decision makers level, this type of messaging is actually very effective, certainly in Israeli circles. And therefore we have the support of the current Ministry of Regional Cooperation, and the current Minister of Energy has verbally said to us that he will support such a project of a water energy nexus. We wait to see a new government in Israel, and we're hopeful that in fact it's going to be a government that will move forward in a peace process, particularly with Palestine, so that we can truly solve the critical water crisis that we see there.
The water energy nexus clearly has a lot of merit, but as an environmental organization, I'm wondering if you've given thought to some of the collateral environmental problems of desalination, particularly disposal of brines, which I think is a small problem in the Mediterranean, probably an acute problem in the Red Sea?
So we have, and given that there's 5 of the largest desalination plants in the world already in place for close to a decade, there's also a lot of research on the implications. And the biggest implication of desalination is the energy use, and if it's fossil, then of course we're contributing to climate change. So the call that it be solar power removes one of the most significant environmental concerns. The brine on the Mediterranean remains a problem. The evidence until now is that it's very local, but given that there will be more and more desalination plants built not only on the Israeli coast, but around the whole eastern Mediterranean, in Palestine, in Lebanon, in Egypt, in Greece, in Syria, there's a lot more research that needs to be done. But the alternative of not, given something that we're not responsible for, climate change, given the impacts of climate change on our region, what alternative is there? If we don't increase the water supply, then we are going to see increased animosity, heightened concern for further conflict, and therefore we think that desalination in these circumstances, as the last resort, is needed.
I'm not suggesting that there's an alternative to it. I'm just suggesting that this is a management issue that needs to be dealt with down the road.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you. Actually, now I have 2 questions. One is about the use of solar power. I'm wondering if there are obstacles to its use that are specific to the region, and how those might be overcome. And since the salts from the desalinization were mentioned, I know that Dead Sea salt is an ingredient in some cosmetic products, and I wonder if that could be, if salt from desalinating the other sources could be used for that too. Might be a source of a way to pay for it.
Yeah. Thank you for your question. About obstacles for solar power in the region. Certainly there's obstacles in Palestine and in Israel to develop solar energy. In Israel there's the issue of space, as well as the same issue of space for developing large solar fields. It's a shared problem in Palestine and Israel. In Israel, it is most of the open land and space areas. They're either declared as nature reserves or military training areas, and therefore it is not possible neither to convince the military or the Greenies to develop solar panels in Israel. In Palestine, there's 2 problems. The first problem is the topography. The area is very hilly, and therefore it is also very difficult to place according to the solar atlas. It's not, many areas are not suitable, but also we have a lot of areas where they are declared as Area C. Whoever doesn't know it's complicated. The West Bank is divided into 3 security and civil areas, and 60% of it is controlled by Israel by civil and administrative issues, and therefore any development in these areas requires a lot of permitting processes, and therefore it takes a long time to excel on solar issues. So basically what leaves Jordan is with a comparative advantage to produce large scale solar is in the vast areas of desert in Amman area. Jordan can produce 20% of electricity needs for Palestine, for Jordan and for Israel only by using 1% of its surface area. And it's remarkable. It's a remarkable number, that also Jordan will not harm the natural space in Jordan, because these are desert area. They don't have a really, ecological value that would damage the environment. And therefore, this is also the beauty of our vision for the water energy nexus. In terms of the Dead Sea salts, I don't think the chemical, I'm not an expert, maybe someone who's a chemistry expert can talk about this, but I don't think the composition of the salts from the Dead Sea are similar to those from the Mediterranean, so they can be used for other purposes, maybe table salt, but we'll see. Definitely there should be technology that would also maximize the treatment of brine, and the technology and membrane technology is also evolving, and perhaps we'll come to a place where we see a solving of this problem.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for a great presentation and even better work. Thank you. I'm curious about one topic which wasn't covered, which is the Golan Heights, and how water issues and future and coming climate stressors are impacting that area, particularly around territorial claims and growing security dynamics there.
So I'll take the Golan Heights on, as if I don't have enough to take on. So the Golan Heights issue is an issue together with Syria, and because we don't have a Syrian partner, we're a non-government organisation, and we really focus on the countries that we represent. We hope in the future there might be a civil society in Syria allowed by the government, and we would hope that a civil society group in Syria would be able to join us. We also hope the same for Lebanon. But there's no question that the control of the Golan Heights is a water issue, because about a third of the water supply to the Sea of Galilee is coming from areas from the Golan Heights. And what in the end prevented a peace treaty between Israel and Syria from being signed was whether the Syrian president will have his feet in the Sea of Galilee.
Back.
With Palestine having such a water scarcity issue and Israel having an abundance of water, has there been any change in the distribution of water from the Western Aquifer since Oslo? From what I've read, there has been yearly rainfall in Ramallah, sometimes that's greater than 1 day. So I don't understand the situation, why it's so dire.
Who wants to take this?
It has unfortunately not changed since Oslo. It has gone worse. The Joint Water Committee that was formed in Oslo to manage the shared water resources and to allow Palestinians, as I mentioned, to dig wells and develop wells in the West Bank has not met for many, many years. It has stopped meeting 12 years ago, and it has just been revived to discuss water, development of water resources again. So the last well that has been approved by the Joint Water Committee for the Palestinian was approximately 12 years ago for domestic needs. And unfortunately, this mechanism cannot go for longer. And what EcoPeace is basically aspiring, as Gida mentioned, is to, since now the water pie has increased by the increase of technology, it's very much possible today to reach an agreement on nature of water resources and for the Palestinians to gain their water rights and their fair share of these natural waters, including from the mountain aquifer, from the eastern aquifer, and from the River Jordan, at least from the system of the River Jordan. if that's enough, do you need to add?
Just that figures can be very misleading. So indeed, rainfall in Ramallah or Jerusalem is very similar to rainfall in London, but temperatures are completely different. So there is a great deal of evaporation in the Middle East, so that the impacts, as far as making water available, are completely different. And people shouldn't be confused by the pure quantity of rainfall and say, oh, well, why does the Middle East have a problem? The Middle East has an enormous problem because rainfall is in a very short period, and as we see, will become even shorter with very high rates of evaporation, which is completely different from Western Europe, which has lots of rainfall over the whole year and very comfortable temperatures that don't lead to high evaporation. So the figures can be very misleading if you don't put the full picture in place.
Also, to add to this information, it's true that there's, in terms of figures, there's high levels of, like, it could reach up to 300 milliliters, 600 milliliters in some areas of rainfall. But with climate change, winter is becoming shorter and raining events are becoming less. But when they happen, they are very intensive, and therefore there's a lot of runoff, which does not allow also the recharge of the aquifers to groundwater, and therefore we're also losing a lot of water with runoff during the intense raining events.
I was just curious about how Israel, Palestine, and Jordan are proposed to share the funding burden of the master plan.
Well, like I said, I mean, a lot of projects that are identified as part of the master plan are important projects that need to happen on the Palestinian and Jordanian side, like development of sewage treatment plants. Because if we look at the current situation in both countries, there are very few treatment plants on the Jordanian Palestinian side with limited capacity and no networks at all. And this is a priority for the countries. But both countries do not have the resources, the financial resources to implement those projects. So what we're trying to do is that certain element would be part of the priority project that would be donor funded, basically, for the two countries. The regional projects would be also funded by a trust fund because they have a regional element. But no donor money will go on to any Israeli projects that are identified, basically, of the master plan. But we are trying to also move forward at this stage because we believe that there is a lot of urgency for many of the projects to move forward. And in our current strategy and programming is to also involve the private sector to invest into many of those projects identified in the master plan.
Have you received any donor commitments yet for those projects?
Well, we have donor commitments from SIDA that's willing to, or Sweden that's willing to contribute into the trust fund. As soon as it materializes and an MOU is signed. Many other countries have want to contribute to that as well.
But over the years, over the last decade, we've been able to help attract about $500 million worth of investments, not just in the Jordan Valley, but also in the Jordan Valley. So the government of Japan built a sewage treatment plant in Jericho in Palestine. USA, New York, Texas built a sewage treatment plant. In northern Jordan, and the government of Israel built a sewage, or the local municipality built a sewage treatment plant in the southern part of the Sea of Galilee. So there's 3 sewage treatment plants in existence, but as Jana said, more needs to take place. But nevertheless, that's an important precedent, that some of the sewage is starting to come out of the Jordan River.
And we as an organization are always seeking smaller projects on ground, especially in Jordan and Palestine, to be implemented through donor money as pilots. So one of the projects, for example, that we are currently conducting on the Jordanian side is to prove a water energy food nexus, where a solar farm would be built in one of the wastewater treatment plants, and to help treat, and then the treated wastewater would be used for agriculture in the Jordan Valley as well. So whenever we can, we're trying to leverage donor money for projects that are identified and part of the master plan.
And back?
Yeah, so I'm thinking of your interdependency model. I'm wondering, it would definitely increase, you're looking at how it would increase the negotiating power of Palestine and Jordan and their infrastructural capacity, but how do you deal, like EcoPeace, how do you target and deal with anti-normalization on all sides and the political apathy around all this cooperation and this transfer of technology? How do you deal with it?
Should I? Well, it's a challenge that we face on a daily basis. We're always condemned of being normalizers, all 3 offices basically. How do we deal with it is that we are committed through really producing research and data, which is a powerful tool, because that can help put pressure on the decision makers. And that's what's really needed to help change policy in our countries. So when we go to our decision makers with the data and the research that with the challenges that we are facing and the changes that are needed on ground, it really helps move things forward. But also our model as EcoPeace being not only a top-down organization dealing with decision makers and policy change, but also dealing with people on ground, people living in communities that share the water resources, educating them, empowering them with the necessary information of their own water realities and the others, their neighbors' water realities, and explaining the need for cooperation and highlighting the national interest, but also the benefits of that cooperation of creating win-win situations for all. So dealing with both, a top-down, bottom-up approach and empowering people with that necessary information help us really put pressure on decision makers to move things forward.
Yeah, my question is maybe a variant of the previous question. The project is kind of presented as a kind of collaboration between 3 co-equal partners, but I think it's no secret that the power disparities between Israel and Palestine are pretty extreme and manifest themselves kind of in every aspect of the conflict. So I'm curious if you've kind of taken that into account, since as I understand it, the idea would be to implement this in the absence of kind of any kind of negotiated settlement. So for example, I think the Joint Water Commission was mentioned, and I know there's been some research to suggest that too, the kind of power imbalance disparity plays out in that forum. So how do you deal with kind of power, in this kind of model, how do you deal with the kind of power disparities, in particular between Israel and Palestine?
Yes, so certainly it's a complex situation, and as Jana mentioned, we always try to use data and facts and figures, and we try to highlight the national interest also for each of our countries in such cooperation models, and certainly for the Palestinians.
we're already dependent on Israel. We're already heavily dependent for water supply and energy supply. And in such a model, we are aspiring also, and the way that we're also convincing our government is it is a way to reduce dependency on Israel. We will be more capable now to buy electricity from Jordan that is clean and affordable, which already is also in the national strategies, because already Jordan and Palestine are discussing the doubling of the electricity amounts that will come from Jordan to Palestine through the Jericho grid. So we're also working within the structures and the strategies that are already in place. We already see that despite the political tensions, on a technical level, still the Palestinians and the Israelis meet and they tackle the day-to-day issues. The water energy nexus slides that you have seen, they've been used at one of the bilateral meetings with donor community by our government representatives to discuss that it might be a possible solution to move forward for the stability of the region. So yes, there's a difference in power, there's a difference in scale, and I always say that I have this metaphor of the Titanic. When climate change hits, there's the people on the, in the first class luxury with champagne and everything, and there's people who are in the bottom. But when you hit the iceberg, we all sink. This is the interest of Israel, that they don't want to see Palestinians sinking with them. And this is the interest of the Palestinians, that they need to really uplift their level in terms of their ability to, and capacity and capability to provide basic needs for the communities. And for the Palestinian Authority, despite that now with all this political craziness that is going on, they speak about disengagement plans and we want to disengage economically from Israel. It's not working because it's not realistic. Israel is heavily dependent on Palestine in labor. We have more than 100,000 Palestinians working in Israel. Palestinians are dependent on Israel on providing basic needs like water and electricity. The reality is there, so we're trying to build on these realities in a more constructive and positive manner, in a way that indeed we find equal partners for such a collaborative interdependency model, where even Palestinians have something to offer and to give if really they're allowed also and enabled to produce desalinated water from Gaza Strip, and to also contribute in the technology development and in the know-how and in the softwares development that are needed and technologies, because also there is a big part of outsourcing for services of young people and young entrepreneurs from the Palestinian fresh graduates to such technologies. So there's always something that would enable a partnership.
If I can just add, it's extremely imperfect, and there's no question about it. It's not unique to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, though, either. There's lots of inequalities and imbalances in so much of international relations. What we're trying to do, though, is to break the status quo. And what we're saying is that if we can reach an agreement on water between Israel and Palestine, then we're sending a message to the publics on both sides. If there's a partner on water, why isn't there a partner on everything else? If we can reach an agreement on water issues and improve the reality on the ground for all peoples, then that creates some trust, that creates some confidence. And from that, we expect leadership to move forward on all of the other final status issues. And that's key. What we think needs to change is the mindset of all or nothing, of either we agree on everything or we agree on nothing. And that's been the mindset for the last 25 years, that either we agree on all final status issues or we don't move forward on anything. And that's left us with nothing. That's left populations on both sides having no faith that there'll ever be peace. That doesn't serve anyone's interest.
Back? Yes.
Thank you. My name is Cordell Keandre. I'm from Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, Oral History. Kind of going off the strain of political apathy, I'm curious y'all's point of view on, and again with consideration to class structure and economic status, have we thought about how we're rationing out the water once we get this? Because you'll get the water, it's just a matter of time. But like, have we gotten to the stage of figuring out who's getting the water and how they are getting it, with consideration to class and economic structure?
So we've started with a small research paper on that is in conjunction to the Water Energy Nexus, because with Water Energy Nexus first of all, we produced a pre-feasibility study, and what we're looking for is to produce a full feasibility study, which would optimize the locations of the sources of water to the receiving side of the water, to the customers and to the communities in need. And therefore, these are customizing the water energy nexus infrastructure that is needed. But in conjunction, we've also produced a draft research paper using a modeling system that if ever there's should be an agreement on natural water and an exchange of water resources between the two countries, it also models the optimization of the locations of the resources with the end user that's going to get this water. We haven't completed this draft yet because it requires a lot of modeling, it requires a lot of research and resources. But any student from Colombia who's interested to take this up as a thesis research, this could be something interesting that, and you come intern in our offices. We have enough space. And
I promised to end by 8:30. I apologize to those of you whose hands I wasn't able to call on, but please join me in thanking Nada and Gadon and Yana for a wonderful presentation.